My mother sat across from me, leaning forward onto an old oak desk in her office. That's what she called it, her office. Even though it was just a desk, a stack of old papers, and her chair in a room no bigger than a walk-in closet. I remember there was an insect flying around the overhead light, clanking into the bulb every so often. That would draw my attention away from my mother's words, until she would snap her fingers and draw me back in. Eventually, she told me to listen up, or their consequences would be huge. The insect was of no fascination to me anymore. My older brother and I were homeschooled. She was our teacher, and she took her job seriously. She was questioning me in regard to my brother's absence from class that morning. I said I didn't know where he was. That was the truth, for the most part. She insisted that, because we share a room, I must have known something about his whereabouts. Again, I said I did not know where he was. For perhaps the first time in my life, I noticed my mother's age. Her face sagged as if the weight of iron bars were bringing her skin down, whether it was due to stress or lack of sleep or any other reason in the world. She looked far older than I had ever noticed before. After a while of her sitting there, staring at me with those burdening eyes, both of her arms folded across the edge of the desk, I finally suggested we go looking for him. "And just where do we suppose we could find him?" she asked. "The woods, maybe?" "You know we aren't supposed to go in the woods. I don't think he would have made it that far anyway. Somebody surely would have stopped him in time." "I don't know then. I don't know where he is." She stared at me for another infinite moment, and finally, the tension in her eyes broke. "Well, then you just have to go to your room, and don't come out." So I did. I trotted back to my room. It was only a few steps away from her office, but tears already begun to well in my eyes because I knew where my brother was. He did go into the woods, and I knew the exact path he told me he was going to take. Like my brother, I wanted to leave. Unlike my brother, I was too afraid at what time to face the unknown. After all, I had never been in those woods, nor had I ever seen what sort of world existed beyond them, if any, for all I knew. I woke up the next morning to my mother banging on my bedroom door. Every morning seemed to be only one more beating away from falling off the hinges. I often wished it just would, just so I wouldn't have to listen to that banging at 6:30 every morning. "Come on, come on, come on, don't be late for class," she yelled. She would repeat this constantly until I told her I was up and getting ready. My classroom was just in the main room of the house. I sat on a chair and she sat beside me. A desk was between us, in case either of us needed to write something down. I remember that morning. I remember how my mother looked, hollow. Perhaps she looked like exactly what she was, a mother grieving her missing son, struggling to accept that we were far more important things in my life, things in the future. I suspect that she had went and consulted my father the previous night, and that she usually would do in a crisis. He always reassured her that good things were to come. I said my pledge before sitting down. I was to always open the curtains and look at the middle house on the property as I said it. It went like this: "To my Father, I thank you. Through you, the seeds of my life were sown. I will give my all to you until there is nothing left to give. I am of you, and you I always will be. I am with you, and with you I will always be." I sat down beside my mother. She wasted no time telling me the story of a boy that ran from home, decades ago. That boy, just a teenager at the time, was called upon by God to leave the horrors of society behind and to organize a group of good, faithful individuals. People that would act as God's replacement to society after its collapse. The man changed his name to Gabriel King before forming a community with a dozen women, Each woman was to bear 2 of his children. He warned the women that their community is not immune, and that one day a child will fall victim to Satan's temptation. That child will leave the community with intentions of bringing shame upon it. I worked up the courage to follow my brother's footsteps, almost literally, and never see the stale, dusty, foul-smelling shack that I called home for all my years. There was nothing to my plan. Just walk out the front doors and leave. That simple. Only, it wasn't that simple. Not in practice. Sure, I wouldn't have to worry about things the way my brother did. Everybody by this point had probably already heard the prophecy, and that they would let me go. The issue is that my struggle was internal. Every day, for years, I had given my allegiance to one man, to one lifestyle, and like everybody else around me, I held on to my faith without question. I believed his sayings more than his doings, and I suppose that part of me was not ready to let go. I had been educated only by the standards of my own small world. The idea that something bigger may be out there, ready to prove me insignificant, was terrifying. Leaving home for the first time was a wager on reality itself. Leaving and staying were both dreadful. My mind was juggling spheres of different colors. I realized that I was pulling my own hair. That's it. This is enough, I thought. This time for me, it's time for me to go. I walked straight into the woods. I wondered how many people in these small homes had considered doing what I was doing. I could barely do it myself, so I kept on walking. The woods are loud at night. Bugs and frogs and birds all chimed into some horrifying harmony. Wolves and coyotes made their noises heard on occasions as well. I couldn't begin to know what else was out there. Sometimes it sounded like something was behind me. I'd look, but of course, nothing. I was sure I was psyching myself out, but the sense of something behind me remained throughout the entirety of the night. I was sure that I heard somebody screaming for help. My brother. Oh dear God, my brother is still in the woods, crying, screaming, pleading for help. I turned left towards the screams. They sounded farther away. I turned right. They were further away again. I moved forward, but the screams, his begging, never sounded any closer. I couldn't turn back. Oh no, I couldn't turn back. By that point, I had been walking forever. Listening to his pleads stabbed my ears, always sounding the same distance no matter how much I walked. I threw up a prayer to whatever crazy entity wanted to listen. I didn't care at this point. To please let it all be in my head. I'd rather be going crazy than have to listen to my poor, innocent brother screaming for help when there was nothing I could seem to do about it. I kept on moving, not even willing to stop, when the pain of the rocks and the needles and the twigs on my ground made my bare feet bleed and sting. At some point, the sky lightened up. Many of the noises, including the screaming, subsided. The birds sang much more lovely music, and finally, I came to the edge of the woods and everything was calm. The edge of the woods was nothing more than a long, narrow clearing before the trees began again. A trail of black rock made a seam straight through it. Yellow and white lines ran in the middle and the edges of it. Now, I know this was a road. At the time, I had never seen one. It never came up during schoolroom discussions. My legs were excruciatingly sore. My feet had moved past the point of pain and were now numb lumps of meat shelled in mud and blood. I didn't know what to do, where to go, or who to meet. In fact, I was afraid of seeing anybody. Soon enough, I felt the ground rumble a tiny bit and heard a dull whistling. I turned my head and waited. Then I saw it. I knew what it was. In school, my mother had explained what a vehicle is. A machine that can transport people faster than God had ever intended humans to travel. If we were meant to travel that fast, she'd say, God would have given us legs to do that. Funny how she said it all, and didn't bother to mention the roads they drive on. It was a big vehicle with an open box attached to the back. I didn't expect vehicles to look like that. It slowed down and stopped on the grass beside the road. The driver hopped out and ran to me. I considered running back into the woods. This man is going to snatch me and commit the unspeakable sins against me. Surely that's what he's going to do, I thought. I felt paralyzed and couldn't run away, even if I wanted to. The man stopped before me. He was mostly normal looking, a bit bigger than most people I'd ever known. There was hair on his face, something I'd never seen before. Jesus, son, he said. I ain't even gonna worry about asking you no questions. Get in. I need to take you to the police. He finished off his sentence by taking his hat off, scratching his thin hair, and replacing it carefully. I followed him back to his truck, half trusting him and half afraid of what might happen if I didn't. The first time I saw Police Chief Richard, he was leaned back in his office chair, with his feet on his desk. When he saw me, he promptly dropped his feet and leaned forwards. His eyes appeared to widen to the size of apples. He motioned for me to come have a seat. The chief calmly did a visual scan over me, then looked back at the man who walked me in. He looked at the man and said, Jesus, Leonard, I've seen some shit in my day, but nothing like this. What's the story? A guy found him on the side of the road. Brought him in straight here. That's it. I think the kid says he doesn't have a name, but I can barely understand him. Well, boy, the chief looked at me. Come take a seat. I'm Police Chief Richard, by the way. You don't have a name, I suppose. How old are you? Do you know where you're from?
I'm 14. You're not going to hurt me, are you?
I asked. Chief Richard kept his right ear towards me as I talked. He shifted his eyes to continue looking at me. He listened carefully and intently. You're asking if we hurt you? Now why on earth would we do that? No, we ain't gonna hurt you. We want to help you, 'cause you look like you sure could use some of it. Now where are you from? He spoke softly and smiled again at the end of his sentences.
The woods,
I told him, in order to keep it short and understandable.
I'm looking for my brother. Have you seen him?
Looking for your mother? Leonard, shut the door behind you and take some notes, will you? Son, I'd be happy to talk about your mother and see what we can do for you. I need some basic information first. Do you know where in the woods you came from?
No. Brother,
I said. I even drew a B and an R in the air so he'd understand. Oh, your brother. Leonard, hand this boy a sheet of paper and a pen. It'd be a lot easier if you could write this stuff down for us, okay? I wrote down all the information I could give him. I wrote I was 14, looking for my brother, and am from a community in the woods, but I have no idea where in the woods. Okay, how many people in this community?
35. Now my brother and I are gone.
I wrote. Okay, son, we'll send some people out to find this place. They must be the ones that did this to you, right? He pointed towards my arm and face. I sat in silence for a moment. I didn't know what to do or say. I looked at my sheet of paper and wrote the truth. It was an awkward moment of writing, but I did it. My father would make all his children dedicate themselves to him, one piece at a time. For me, it was my arm, an eye, an ear, and my lips. For my brother, it was much more. Much, much more. He was close to being fully dedicated. Some tears smudged the ink as they fell into the paper. It hadn't occurred to me beforehand how much of a monster I must have looked like to these people. A boy missing an arm, an empty eye socket, just a plain hole for an ear, not even any lips, just exposed gums and rotting teeth. I felt disgusting. Chief was pale. And your brother? He asked. I supposed he must have crawled out of that place. I nodded, and tears continued to fall. After some moment of silence, the chief looked at me and said, "You know, son, we're all born into some kind of cult or another, but I'm glad you came out of yours.